Hello and welcome to Up the Rabbit Hole podcast number 3. We've made it, ladies and gentlemen. We've reached the hurdle of 3, and I'm excited to be doing the third podcast of Up the Rabbit Hole. And last week we were looking at reviewing Stephen R. Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Powerful Lessons in Change. So this week I want to have a look at just reviewing chapter 2, looking at some of the key ideas, and just going through it and seeing if we can get any knowledge out of there. So the idea that the author proposes is that there's 3 stages of being an individual, I guess. And I don't know if this applies to organizations too. But initially you start as dependent, and you move into independence, and independence is a selfish place to be, but competent, I guess. And from independence, you move into interdependence. So the whole point of the book is to sort of guide you through the 3 private victories that will take you to independence, and then the 3 public victories that will take you to interdependence, and then obviously sharpening the saw, maintaining the habits. So the second chapter is called Begin with the End in Mind. And it seems to be, to me, about imagination. And this idea that you cannot create something you have not imagined. And I think this is true. You just got to think about it for a few minutes. If you're unhappy, normally it means something's happened that you imagined wouldn't happen, or doesn't fit into a dream that you have of how to live or how to experience things. So the author goes into what it means to begin with the end in mind. The imagination, and I've highlighted some key points. So the author says the most fundamental application of begin with the end in mind is to begin today with the image, picture, or paradigm of the end of your life as your frame of reference, or the criterion by which everything else is examined. Each part of your life, today's behavior, tomorrow's behavior, next week's behavior, next month's behavior, can be examined in the context of the whole. So I guess the idea is almost like memento mori with Stoicism. So, if with the Stoics, it's always like, imagine if you die. People always wonder why there's skulls on everything in Stoicism, but I guess it represents death, and the idea that if you were to die tomorrow, what would you do today? So each morning you wake up, think, I will die tomorrow, my family, my pets, whatever might pass away, which is very sad, and how will I behave? So in the book, it asks you to imagine your funeral, and imagine what the people might say about you, and if you'd be happy with that. So, it's easy to be busy, but sometimes you have to sit down and imagine the future. So the author has a chapter called All Things Are Created Twice. Begin with the end in mind is based on the principle that all things are created twice. There's a mental, says the author, or first creation, and a physical or second creation. So the idea is that first you need to imagine a thing. You imagine it in the future, and then you need to go after it. I guess the idea is that, if you talk down to yourself the whole time, break yourself down, if your internal voice is negative, not necessarily negative, but just doesn't believe in anything, there might be reasons that you feel that way. Your life experiences might have guided you in that direction, but then you won't create anything. Right? It seems simple, but it's actually hard to implement. And also you've got to be rational. You can't believe you're going to be the world's best football player, but you can think, maybe I can improve my relationships by 1% or 0.5% or 0.1% of the time. Maybe I can be a better listener. So there's another chapter called By Design or Default. Let's say parts in the chapter. And it says, in our personal lives, if we do not develop our own self-awareness and become responsible for first creations, first imaginations, we empower other people and circumstances outside our influence to shape much of our lives by default. We reactively live the scripts handed to us by family, associates, other people's agendas, the pressure of circumstance scripts. Sorry, I got a bit of a cough. From our earlier years, from our training, our conditioning. So the author's saying there are scripts that we receive from other people, other experiences, these are external to us. They're not our principles. And later in the chapter, he gives you ideas on how to define your principles. But and I always have this thought. I mean, I've never been to America. I've never been to Texas. But whenever you see a Texan in a movie or being interviewed, they seem to have a very firm belief in their beliefs, and if you try and convince them of something else, they have a little quick comeback for why that's not going to work. And they believe in the Bible, they believe in this, they believe in their amendment rights, for instance. And but as much as you may disagree with some of the ideas, I guess religious people are the same. It's good to maybe have some principles and try and work them out, because then it tells you how to behave in life. It's almost like a logic, gives you some logic to apply. Difficult, especially. So be careful which principles you choose, because if your principle is you're going to stop and help every single person who I don't know, who needs something urgently, you'll never have time for yourself. So be careful. But the book gets into how to design these and how to find your center. The author also goes into defining leadership and management. So I mean, the idea is that management is following. You've been told what to do, you do the thing and you just do it. Whereas leadership, you have a longer view. A good example would be, for instance, if you're just driving around and your job is to make sure the car runs, you can make the car run, but you can't direct it where to go. Maybe you're driving into a flooded area or something. Whereas leadership is the idea that, well, it's supposed to be the idea. I mean, you've probably met a few leaders in your life where this is not the case. So it says, leadership deals with top line. What are the things I want to accomplish? Management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. We are more in need of a vision or destination and a compass, a set of principles or directions, and less in need of a roadmap, says the author. We often don't know what the terrain ahead will be like or what we will need to go through it. Much will depend on our judgment at the time. So then the author says you need to use your imagination and your conscience to develop a bit of self-awareness and figure out which scripts are truly yours and which you've been told. Deeply embedded habits that are totally unworthy of us. So there's a lot of things you've been told to do. Figure out if they are important or not, whether you should keep doing them, why you do them. If you don't do them, will it upset your community? Is that something you should be concerned about or not? So, and a lot of people, they will hammer you down if you try and change. I pull out my ammunition, my superior size, says the author, my position of authority, and I yell or intimidate, and I threaten or punish, and I win. I stand there victorious in the middle of the debris in a shattered relationship, while my children are outwardly submissive and inwardly rebellious, suppressing feelings that will come out. He's talking about being overreactive, reacting to everything, and the effects it can have on people around you. He then goes on to define values, and because the author says, because I'm self-aware, because I have imagination and conscience, I can examine my deepest values. I can realize that the script I'm living is not in harmony with those values, says Stephen R. Covey, that my life is not the product of my own proactive design, but the result of the first creation. I have deferred to circumstances than other people. So when he talks about the first creation, he's talking about the imagination. So the idea is first you create it in your mind, and then secondly, you implement it in life. So this book is about the first creation, about imagining what your principles are, what your values are, what roadmap you will use to go forward in life. It sounds simple, but I think a lot of people don't have it. And I mean, you get told a lot of things, and you don't really, like sayings, and you don't really think, does this, count to, or what, save your pennies and they look after the pounds? Is it true? I don't know. So the author goes on to say you need to develop a personal mission statement, and he gives a few examples of that. So he says the most effective way I know to begin with the end in mind is to develop a personal statement or philosophy or creed. It focuses on what you want to be, so the type of character you want to be, and to do. So what I want to be and what I want to do, contributions and achievements, and on the values or principles on which being and doing are based. And let me say I read this chapter and then I read the next chapter, and I've been putting off doing this part. Took my diary and I made a few pages and try. It's very difficult to define your own mission statement and what you believe in, or what's going to guide you. And I think we all know this. I mean, a lot of people go to gym and say they're going to go every day, but you don't, because doing one thing means sacrificing something else. And normally, you don't want to sacrifice the fun thing. You didn't get up, you didn't gym, you had a long day, you get home, the food's ready, or you make the food, and now you don't want to exercise. You don't want to read what you said you would read. You don't want to phone your family member. So, yeah, he tells you to do a personal mission statement, and how he guides you in this idea is that you have to figure out what your center is. And when he talks about a center is something that gives you security, guidance, wisdom, or power, says the author. It says, in order to write a personal mission statement, and I'm just reading the highlighted parts that I found interesting. Obviously, the chapter is way more detailed. In order to write a personal mission statement, we must begin at the very center of our circle of influence, which was discussed in the previous chapter. That center comprised of our most basic paradigms, the lens through which we see the world. It is here that we deal with our vision and our values. It is here that we use our endowment of self-awareness to examine our maps accurately, describe the territory, that our paradigms are based on principles and reality. And so the idea is that your center is based on 4 factors. So what gives you security, wisdom, power, and guidance. So the author gives a few centers. I'm not going to read each one, but the one would be, for instance, spouse-centeredness, and I highlighted, it says, if our sense of emotional worth comes primarily from our marriage, then we become highly dependent upon that relationship. We become vulnerable to the moods and feelings, the behavior and treatment of our spouse, or to any external event that may impinge on the relationship. And then there's a few more. There's family-centeredness, so obsession, like family-centered. People who are family-centered get their sense of security or personal worth from the family tradition and culture, or the family reputation. Thus, they become vulnerable to any changes in their traditional culture. Family-centered parents do not have the emotional freedom, the power to raise their children with their ultimate welfare truly in mind. If they derive their own security from the family, their need to be popular with their children may override the importance of a long-term investment. And the author goes on. And then, I'm not going to do each one, but there's money-centeredness, work-centeredness, friend, enemy-centeredness. So the idea is if these are your core centers, church-centeredness, for instance, if these are your centers, your decision-making will always be filtered through these centers, and the effect that will have. So if you're going to define for instance, if you say you're going to gym every day, but you're church-centered, you obviously might not be able to gym on a Sunday because it's important for you to go to church. So you need to know which center you're filtering through and what will be important to you. And then you get self-centeredness, and there's a whole section on defining or figuring out your center. The ultimate goal is to get yourself to a principle center. So I'll spend more time on this one. The author says, by centering our lives on correct principles, we create a solid foundation for development of our 4 life support factors. Our security comes from knowing that, unlike other centers based on people or things which are subject to frequent and immediate change, correct principles do not change. We can depend on them. Principles are, sorry guys, I got a little bit of rooibos here, I have to drink. Principles are deep, fundamental truths. So this is probably the most important thing you're going to read. Principles are deep, fundamental truths, classic truths, generic common denominators. They are tightly interwoven threads running with exactness, consistency, beauty, and strength through the fabric of life. So that's the author's definition of a principle. He goes on to say the wisdom and guidance that accompany principle-centered living come from correct maps. So we spoke about the maps before. It's ways of living. A map is a way of seeing the world from the way things really are, have been, and will be, says the author. Correct maps enable us to clearly see where we want to go and how to get there. We can make our decisions using correct data that will make the implementation possible. And for instance, he says principles have natural consequences attached to them. There are positive consequences when we live in harmony with principles. There are negative consequences when we ignore them. But because these principles apply to everyone, whether or not they are aware, this limitation is universal. And the more we know of correct principles, the greater is our personal freedom and to act wisely. By centering our lives on timeless, unchanging principles, says the author, we create a fundamental paradigm of effective living. It is the center that puts all other centers in perspective. And there's a little drawing in the book. It says principles, and they give you a few: money, work, possessions, pleasure, friend, enemy, church, self, spouse. The author says, as a principle-centered person, you try to stand apart from the emotion of the situation. So in the previous chapter, he spoke about stimulus and response, and from other factors that would act on your work needs. I've been reading the Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, the finance one, and the author also, there's a part that I read recently where the author speaks about, like don't take things personally, like hear it, listen to it, but don't obsess over it, move on. Otherwise you get laser focused. It's not good for you. But if you're principle centered, it won't affect you. If you know you did your best and you did your best work, that's fine. You won't be bothered if someone says you were lazy when you know you weren't. So I guess that's the idea of principles, is that if you do live by them and you know where you are and what you've done, it's also hard for people to throw you off balance. So he says, looking at the balanced whole, the work needs, the family needs, other needs that may be involved, and the possible implications of the various alternative decisions, you'll try to come up with the best solution, taking all factors into consideration. The author also says, first, you are not being acted upon by other people or circumstances. You are proactively choosing what you determine to be the best alternative. You make your decision consciously and knowledgeably. Second, you know your decision is most effective because it is based on principles with predictable long-term results. Third, what you choose to do contributes to your ultimate values in life. Staying at work to get the edge on someone at the office, he says, is an entirely different evening in your life from staying because you value your boss's effectiveness and you genuinely want to contribute to company's welfare. So fourth, and later on in the book, he gives an example of following principles and how and your center will change your decision making. Fourth, you can communicate to your wife and your boss within the strong networks you've created in your so not independent, interdependent relationships. Because you're independent, you can effectively be interdependent. You might decide to delegate. What is to delegate? But the whole idea is, I'm not going to read all of this, but the whole idea is that if you work through your principles, your decision making will be a little bit more clear because you'll make them based on what you value, not on. And yes, you might get in a few arguments in that, but so be it. It'll lead you where you need to be. You're not going to be at the office for every night for 24 years and then wonder why your children have issues. You'll tell your boss you can't make it, and then if they don't like it and they work it out, then maybe that's the best thing, and you go look for something else to do. As a principle-centered person, says Stephen R. Covey, you see things differently, and because you see things differently, you think differently. You act differently because you have a high degree of security, guidance, wisdom, power that flows from a solid, unchanging core. You have the foundation of a highly proactive and highly effective life. And I do agree with this. I mentioned in the previous podcast that I've read this book before, and I just couldn't, when I was younger, and I couldn't understand or relate to it properly. But I realize now that my changes in my life came when I was proactive, when I stopped blaming my mother, blaming my home, or living in a bad neighborhood for my problems, not having transport, for instance. And basically just said, hey, I'm going to have to start doing something to get out of this and work your way up, wake up, go work, take chances. I don't like the word, like hustle seems popular at the moment, hustle. That's a whole nother podcast we can do about it, this idea that the things you do for fun should make money. That's not right. You're going to be stressed the whole time. You should be de-stressed. So that's not what I'm talking about. I don't think that's what proactivity is. And I think the idea is that you can begin with proactivity, but once you define your principles and your values, then you won't make these mistakes of monetizing your gym routine, and if that's how you make your money, that's fine. I'm not saying something wrong with that, but then you should be doing something else for relaxation and enjoyment that's not measured. So let's carry on and see what the author says. Like I said, I advise you to get the book. Excellent book. There's a section on identifying roles and goals. So, if you read the book, you can do that. And then there's different mission statements you can look at making. So a mission, when the author talks about a mission statement, it would be a statement of your center, your principles, your values, your goals. So you can do a family one with your wife, you can do a one for your work, you can do one with your children, and obviously one for yourself, which should add all these elements. He gives an example of going to a hotel where the hotel had an organizational mission statement, but he went to two separate hotels, and the one had their own personal mission statement. So, and he had a much better experience there just because they knew what they were trying to do. The author then gives you a few application suggestions. The idea about the funeral, the impressions you would have if you died, what people would say about you. Define your roles, your center, and obviously the most important is a mission statement. So yeah, try and get the book if you can. Like I said, I've been busy, and maybe I was just going to chat a bit before I end the podcast. I've been working on my mission statement, and it's as I said, it's not simple to define what's important to you, because once you do, I always think of Jaime Lannister in Game of Thrones, where he said, you make a vow to the king, and then to your father, and then a vow to, it's like, and then all the vows sort of contradict each other, so you I think that's the point of the book, is the vow would always be your center. So maybe you want to play golf, but maybe it's your son's baseball game, and now you got to make a decision. So if you were family centered, you would say, oh, okay, well, my son comes first, but maybe the golf is an important customer and it can help your family survive. So then you make that decision, fine. But then you're at the end of the golf and now they want to go for drinks. That's a good example of, no, I've done the business part. I'm leaving now. I don't think I need to stay for drinks. I think that's where the values will give you an idea. And like I said, I've been trying to define mine. It's quite difficult. You realize like a lot of the values come from people you've read, and you haven't actually thought about why. Like for instance, why is telling the truth better than not telling the truth? It seems to be a universal philosophical idea, but to define it for yourself is hard, because it's so much easier just to lie, and do what you want, which I guess is almost like being in the independent state, or between the dependent independent state that the author speaks about. So obviously the third chapter is about actually implementing those mission statements. So go have a look at the author's website, go download the templates, get the book. I'm busy working through it. I'm just going to do the private victory for now, and then the public victory we'll get to. So once I've implemented my mission statement, maybe I'll read it to you. So it's obviously private, but it could be interesting and discuss some of the points. And if you do your own mission statement, maybe let me know what you think is interesting. What are the core ideas? And I think I think this is also interesting, because a lot of religions and that have rules that you have to follow, and a lot of them are good. A lot of them have been developed over thousands of years, and that's how they got to them. But also, I think if you take 1 million people and they each do their values, and you might find similarities, but no one's going to have the same set. No one's going to, I don't say no one, but I don't think a lot of people have the exact same set. There'll be different things that are important to you. So that's it. Thank you for going up the rabbit hole with me, Up Rabbit, podcast number 3. So let's see if we can keep this up. Maybe I should make that one of my values, that I want to talk about what I think and what I've learned on a weekly basis. But I got to be careful. See where my center lies, and your center can change, I guess. So thank you for joining. Have a good week. See you next week. That's it from me, Up Rabbit. Cheerio.